This is probably the weirdest video anyone in the Starfox community has ever made. And you know what I gotta say about that? Good. We need to stop yelling at each other about if Zero was a good game or why Command sucks. Let's be real. We've been yelling about that for years now. We need to stop doing that. And we need to talk about brain squids. Before we jump in, I want to cover a few disclaimers. The first is that the name of this enemy technically cannot be found in the game as far as I can tell. Unfortunately, even with the information scanner active, it says nothing about them. After digging through 2 different game manuals, I found them referred to as the following. The Nintendo Power Guide refers to them simply as the creatures. The Prima's official strategy guide refers to them as brain squids. Really, for the purposes of this video, the name of these enemies doesn't really matter. I think brain squids is a better name personally, so we're gonna be calling them that for this video. The second disclaimer is that for me personally, making video game theories is something of a fun brain exercise. There will be speculatory bits to this video, and those bits will be appropriately flagged as to not confuse it with the evidence I've found. I just think making video game theories is a fun thing to do, even if some theories are outlandishly wild. It can be fun to just ponder some things and see if there's connections. So long as we're upfront that it's for fun and we're just speculating. You may not agree with the theory, and that's fine. The third and final disclaimer is that we're only utilizing evidence from the finalized product of StarFoxadventures and other released Star Fox games. As someone who has been in the Star Fox and Dinosaur Planet communities since the early 2000s, I can assure you that I know all about the cut content, but for this video, we're only going to be considering what we know to be canon and draw speculation from there. With all of that out of the way, let's dive in. The brain squid is the first enemy you will encounter upon reaching the recently attacked Krazoa Palace as Crystal. They later show up in other places, such as the other sections of Krazoa Palace, various Krazoa shrines, and the Ocean Force Point Temple. Despite being called a brain squid, they actually more resemble jellyfish, at least in my opinion. Their physique is quite bizarre, with a brain in its head-like structure. However, it should be noted that jellyfish don't actually have brains. I had to research jellyfish anatomy to do this video, and by the time I was done reading about it, I also felt like I didn't have a brain, but that's neither here nor there. The brain squid has tentacles that drape downward, but those will rise and spin if it should feel threatened. But I think the most intriguing part is the glow that surrounds its body. After replaying the game, and then replaying a good portion of it again, I can fairly safely say that this aura only appears on one other creature. The Krazoa spirits. Most of what we know about the Krazoa is told to us through other NPCs. We can glean from their dialogue that the Krazoa are an intelligent race that are worshipped as gods. They appear to be incorporeal spirits that have magical powers and used to rule Dinosaur Planet, presumably from their palace. The official manual refers to them as bringers of life to Dinosaur Planet. I could honestly ramble about the Krazoa for hours, but I'll refrain from it. I think it's better saved for a separate video. Looking at their structures, the Krazoa appear to be disembodied simian heads with tendrils trailing off of them. When you compare the brain squid to the Krazoa spirits, it feels like there's a lot of similarities. The colorful aura, the head attached to the flowing appendages, for lack of a better way to describe them, even the strange face on the brain squids actually does mimic the facial shape of the Krazoa. I stated this towards the start of the video, but the brain squids can be found in 3 areas. All 3 of these places have significance to the Krazoa. The palace is, of course, where the Krazoa make their home. The shrines are where one finds the spirits to take them back to their home, and the Ocean Force Point Temple has Krazoa statues abound inside of it, not to mention is found behind a giant Krazoa statue head. I am sliding a little into speculation territory with this next bit. During my recent playthrough, another observation I noticed is that the Krazoa seem to have a natural tide of water. In their shrines, for instance, there are often pools of water around the rims of their rooms, and there are watery walls and structures often found in Krazoa Palace. Squids, or jellyfish, are both considered marine creatures, associated with water. I could also not help but notice The brain squids also tended to be in locations where water was typically not too far away. There were a few shrines where it was a few rooms over at most, but generally speaking, there was water nearby. Even if it was just rain. With all of this in mind, I feel as though we're at a point where we can say there must be some sort of connection between the Krizoa and the brain squids. But there's one big question we still need to answer. What is that connection? I've thought about this for a while, and it's kind of an off-the-rail theory, but it's the only one that I can really make sense of. As much sense as I think anyone can make from this game, considering the lore and how off the rails that even goes. Now, obviously, as we dive into this theory section, do you remember, given the nature of this game, there is quite a bit of assumptions we have to make, inferring various things, and, you know, stretching just a tiny smidge to make certain things work, simply because the game is kind of vague about some things and not about other things. It becomes kind of a bit of a mental exercise to make some of this stuff make sense. And I'm not just talking about the theory itself, but about a lot of stuff with this game in general. Starfoxadventures is really good at laying, I would say, some really good foundation for interesting lore, but sometimes it just gives you snippets here and there and it doesn't really follow through, as is kind of the nature of a lot of Nintendo games. And sometimes that makes it so that if you're trying to speculate on stuff, you kind of have to infer things. That's basically what I'm trying to say here. With all of that being said, I think the brain squids are Krizoa. Or, to be more accurate, I think they used to be Krizoa. If you look at the information on your PDA about Krizoa Palace, you can read that the Krizoa beings are a race who could control dark matter. It also mentions that Krizoa Palace was once their home. This could really have two meanings. Meaning number one, it's not their home now because they were chased out by scales. Meaning number two, it's not their home now because they are no longer alive. When we talk about the Krizoa spirits, there's some stuff to consider about the nature of their existence. The lore refers to them as peace spirits and bringers of life, which at first gives off the impression that their nature is otherworldly and transcendent of regular mortality. But there's evidence to prove that the Krizoa spirits we see may not have always been in this form. For instance, the Krizoa statues depict them as a tall race, though much of their body is mysteriously shrouded in a robe. Personally, when it comes to their nature, I tend to believe the Krizoa are dead and exist as ghosts, rather than simply having always been spirits. Yet the Krizoa we see in-game are small and seemingly vulnerable. I think the statues depict the Krizoa when they were alive, and what we see in the game is the ghost of their powerful soul. Seeing as the Krizoa also left behind many various buildings scattered across the planet, I'm inclined to believe that when the game refers to them as a race, they're referring to the Krizoa as a civilization of people that existed long before the game, not just the 6 spirits we see. I combed through a lot of dialogue about our quest to collect the Krizoa spirits, and while there are occasional mentions of how many we need to collect, I failed to find anything that mentioned that those were the only spirits to exist. There is some dialogue with the Krizoa at Moon Mountain Pass about collecting the 5 final Krizoa, but there's a lot of speculation that that Krizoa in particular is Andros in disguise, which we will definitely talk about later, probably in another video. There's also the potential that he just needs that many to fulfill his plan, or maybe those are the ones left to collect because those are the ones that fled during the attack on Krizoa Palace. So if we believe that the Krizoa used to be a race of more than the 6 spirits we see, then we have to acknowledge that there is the potential for more than 6 Krizoa spirits to exist. Let's look back at the brain squids. In particular, let's look at their brains. When we think of Star Fox and brains, I think we're all reminded of a certain line from a certain antagonist.
I have the brains to rule Lylat.
So, Andros, you show your true form.
In the dialogue with the Earthwalker guards, it's possible to learn that when Scales attacked, he brought a dark force with him. That force is confirmed to be Andros in the final minutes of the game. Andros, who is always associated with a nightmare fuel boss fight, including a section where you literally fight his brain in Star Fox 64. So Andros comes to Krazoa Palace, and in his wake, there's strange enemies with not only Krazoa-like faces, but brains on their heads. It feels a little on the nose when you think about it. With this information in mind, I can't help but wonder if the brain squids were Krazoa that failed to flee the dark force that was Andros. Andros has historically had supernatural abilities, dating even as far back as the Nintendo Power comics. Even in Star Fox Zero, his clothing resembles that of a wizard, or really kind of even a Krazoa, weirdly enough. Andros also just straight up said no thanks to dying after the Lylat Wars, so he seems pretty powerful. Or at least he has a lot of plot armor. Re-entering speculation territory, but with these things in mind, would it really be a stretch that perhaps an undead Andros was able to corrupt Krazoa spirits that did not flee? Maybe the reason he needs others to collect the spirits is because he cannot touch them himself without them corrupting due to his evil and not entirely alive nature. He can't really have a Krazoa inhabit his body when he doesn't have a body after all. And yet, Andros' entire resurrection plan requires the power of the Krazoa, the bringers of life. I theorize the following happened prior to the start of the game. Andros influenced General Scales into attacking Krazoa Palace so Andros could have an opening to resurrect himself by using Krazoa spirits. Andros realizes he can't directly use the Krazoa because he's incorporeal, and his dark influence corrupts the Krazoa, turning them into brain squids. Andros realizes he needs someone with the ability to channel the Krazoa, Crystal, so he can be resurrected. General Scales seized one of the Krazoa spirits from its shrine, this being the final Krazoa we obtain. I don't actually believe General Scales ever mentions needing the Krazoa for anything. He's really just looking for the spellstones. So why would he have the Krazoa if not to safeguard it for Andros, even if he didn't really know that he was safeguarding it for Andros? When it comes to General Scales' motivations, I'm not entirely sure what his plan was in general. It was just kind of like, I'm gonna cause mischief, and from causing mischief, I'm going to pressure, I guess, the ruling tribes into bending the knee. My personal thought is he was holding the spellstones or attempting to hold them kind of as like a ransom. Basically, he'd be saying to the Cloudrunners and the Earthwalkers, hey, I have your spellstones. If you don't bend the knee and let us take over, then the planet is gonna fall apart and presumably explode at some point due to the massive amounts of energy flowing from the core. That's just kind of my speculation. I don't think he actually like wants Dinosaur Planet to explode, but I think he's using it as his bargaining chip. Obviously he was influenced by Andros to do all of this, but I think that's his character motivation, or at least that's kind of what I assume it is. Obviously this is speculation and it will be flagged thus on the video. I also want to point out that I don't believe anyone genuinely knew the Krazoa were necessary in order for the planet to fully be put back together. I think everyone was under the impression it was simply the spellstones that were required, but that's also speculation. I really don't think Scales factored in the Krazoa at all in his plan. I think he just kind of came into the Krazoa Palace, broke the seals to mess up the planet, chased out the Krazoa. I really don't think he had any plans for the Krazoa. Back to the assumed order of events. Unfortunately, all of the Krazoa left are corrupted or have fled. Andros now needs someone to go hunt them down. With this theory in mind, the spirits he tried to use prematurely ended up being the brand squids we see in the game. As for the squids seen in the shrines and the Ocean Force Point Temple, it's entirely possible these corrupted spirits tried to flee and simply did not escape the corruption in time. And in the end, they gravitated to places associated with who they used to be, which is incredibly sad, honestly. Admittedly, this is where the theory gets a little weak, but regardless, I still think it's not out of the question. I do know Nintendo tends to keep it fairly simple on lore with Star Fox, and the likely reason for the enemies existing is that they really just wanted to make weird-looking squid bad guys. Star Fox is a franchise that is fairly shallow on lore until it's suddenly not, but that's something to talk about in a later video or 50. And who knows, maybe a dev will come by and totally obliterate this theory in an instant. But I'll be honest, I think it's a neat idea. And it definitely makes me look at the brand squids in a more terrifying light. What do you think? Do you have a crazy brand squid theory? Do you think I'm crazy for having a brand squid theory? Do you just want me to talk about how Command is bad and Zero's awful and nothing will ever be better than Star Fox 64? I don't actually think those things are true, by the way. Let me know in the comments. Until next time, please refrain from touching the brain squids. They will smack you. Bye!